Today we're going to learn how to locate fractions on a number line using unit fractions and then also finding fractions that are greater than a whole. So here's our number line, and here are the fractions that we're going to try to find. As you can see, the number line starts with 0 and ends with 1, and we're going to look for the unit fractions within that one whole. The second part of the lesson, we're actually going to have 3 wholes, 1, 2, 3, instead of just one whole, and we're going to try to find fractions that are greater than that one whole. So let's start here. I see the first fraction I need to find is 1/2, and the denominator in 1/2 is 2. That tells me that I have to take my whole and split it up into halves. Now, a lot of students have been using fraction bars in math, so we're going to do the same, and that'll help us find it on the number line. If I split up this whole into halves, there, now the denominator is 2 and there are 2 parts in the whole. I'm going to shade in 1, starting at the 0, and that brings me to 1/2. Pretty good so far. Let's try 1/3. In order to find it on the number line, I'll make another fraction bar. Still one whole, but this time I'm going to divide it into thirds, or 3 equal parts. It's about thirds right there. And I'll shade in 1. Looking where it corresponds on the number line, 1/3 would be about there. Now let's try 1/4. I'll make a different fraction bar here. It's still one whole, and this time, since the denominator says 4, I'll break it into halves, 2 parts, and then I'll double each part to make 4, or fourths. Starting at the 0, I'll shade in 1 out of 4, or 1/4, and that corresponds to about there on the number line. So that would be 1/4 on the number line. So within the one whole, we actually have 1/4, 2/4, 3/4, 4/4, 1/3, 2/3, 3/3, and 1/2, 1/2, 2/2. The cool part about it is, if I'm looking at 1/4, and that's 2/4, and that's 3/4, and that's 4/4, you just have to remember that when the numerator and the denominator are the same, it equals one whole, or is equivalent to one whole. Okay? Same thing with 1/2, of course. This is 1/2, that would be 2/2. It's exactly the same. Equivalent. So now let's look down here, and instead of this being one whole that covers the entire number line, we actually have 3 wholes here. Here's a whole, here's a second whole, and here's a third whole. When you're looking at fractions, always start with the first whole. I'm going to draw my fraction bar, and the fraction I'm looking for is 3/2 this time. So I'm looking at the 2 and thinking I need a denominator of 2, which means I need to split this whole into 2 equal parts, or halves. Did I do it? Yep, halves. Here's 1/2, 2/2, or a whole. 2/2 equals a whole, and that's not enough. I need 3/2. So I'm actually going to add another whole here, second whole. And now I can do 3/2, 1/2, 2/2, 3/2, and my 3/2 mark is going to be right about there. Another way of saying it besides 3/2 is 1/2. 1 whole and a half. Let's try 6/3 now. I'll draw a brand new fraction bar up here. I always start with one whole, right? But instead of dividing it by 2 equal parts, I'm going to divide it into 3 equal parts, or thirds. That's a little off. Sorry. That's pretty good. So here are my thirds. Starting at the 0, this would be 1/3, 2/3, 3/3, or 1 whole. This fraction is greater than a whole. I have to add another whole. There's my second whole right there. Again, I have to divide it into thirds. And now let's see if I can get 6/3. 1/3, 2/3, 3/3, 4/3, 5/3, 6/3. 6/3 would bring me right to there. And it's actually the same thing as 2. 6/3 or 2 wholes. And finally, let's try for 10/4. I'm going to make a whole again using a fraction bar. But instead of halves or thirds, I'm going to divide this one into fourths. I already know I have more than 4/4, so I'm going to add another 4/4 or a whole. All right, 4/4 and 4/4 make 8/4. I still don't have enough. I need another 4/4. So I'll add these over here. All right, let's count them. 1/4, 2, 3, 4/4 or a whole. 5, 6, 7, 8/4 or 2 wholes. 9/4, 10/4 would be right about there. So as you can see, sometimes when you're looking at fractions, when the numerator is greater than the denominator, you know that it's greater than a whole. And in that case, on a number line, those fractions are going to be greater than 1. I hope that helps.